Hi, this is James Jokum, host of Webcomics Reviews and Interviews. Tonight, it's the Game of Thrones breakdown, so sit back, relax, and let the Geek Fest begin. Alright, because I'm a nice guy, I'm going to give you 2 heads up. First, here be spoilers. If you've not yet watched Game of Thrones Season 8 and you plan to do so, reasonably spoiler-free, this is not the show for you. We're going to be doing a reasonably in-depth analysis of the last 6 shows of the show. And that sounds all sorts of depressing when you actually say it out loud. But the point here is we're going to be going so far into spoiler country that we're going to be able to say hi to Arya from a distance, because there's no way I'm getting anywhere near her. And keep in mind that since we are talking about something involving George R.R. Martin, there's no way we're going to be able to have a kid-safe podcast tonight. So I'm giving you a heads up and letting you know there's going to be some mature subject matter. And just like the spoilers, I'm not really going to care. There's not enough to get an explicit tag, so don't worry about that. It's just straight up, there are going to be certain topics that will probably come up. And so because of that, I'm going to just give the show a blanket. If you're trying to avoid mature subject matter, this is not the podcast for you. So, here be spoilers, here be mature subject matter. You have been warned. And now that I've gotten rid of about 3 of you, it's just been sort of an incredible show. And it's going to be really depressing to see it go. I really wish, like a lot of other people, that the last 6 shows had been a little bit more awesome. But, I'm reasonably satisfied. I'm not really happy with how it ended up, don't get me wrong. But at the same time, we've seen some incredible stuff. We've seen dragons, some of the best dragons I've seen on TV or movies ever. And I've seen a lot of them. Trust me on this. Just mention Vermithrax and Go Motion. We've seen somebody who got drunk and knew things and apparently did a lot of both. We've seen Arya go from shy girl who just liked watching the occasional parade to the best assassin on the entire continent. We've seen Dany go from being shy, reclusive teenage girl to the scariest thing on the entire planet. We've seen Jon Snow complain about just about everything. We've met some really great people, and we've met some really weird people. We've Lady Brienne. I would really like to get to get her drunk. Straight up, did she actually drink more than about maybe a sip of wine throughout the entire show? Sort of impressive. And if we're out talking, getting drunk, Cersei, straight up. I think if you gave her just regular fruit juice rather than wine, things would have been much, much different, because I think she's straight up a mean drunk, and she kept herself drunk all the time. And straight up, could they at least at some point told us what exactly is going on between the honeycomb, the donkey, and the brothel? Seriously? They never got into that? I know the joke. It's just, I can't do research on the internet. But it would have been great to see that just go off just once. And don't get me wrong, there's been a lot of really cool stuff out there as well. I mean, once you get past Tormund and his milk fetish. But, and there's a really great excuse to not ever go to another wedding as long as I live. But at the same time, the scenery's been incredible. The attention to detail has just been totally awesome. And, these people have chewed enough scenery that accounts for 90% of the budget right there. It's just when it comes down to it, we're seeing a lot of really great stuff. We're seeing some incredible details. We're seeing some really nice world building stuff. The characters are incredible. I mean, we've actually got people with some actually decent backstories. Some really messed up backstories, granted, but some really nice backstories. We've seen some really incredibly nice details here and there. All the various ships have all the various sigils and designs and symbols and so on and so forth. This has actually been one of those low fantasy realms where we've actually had a reason that there wasn't a whole lot of magic. There was a lot of magic at one point. Bad things happened. And we're seeing a sort of renaissance of it. So overall, there's been a lot of really great stuff in the show. So when I start basically having fun with it here and there, keep in mind it's because there's a definite love of the show. I mean, there's absolutely so much stuff there to digest that even I had to watch the occasional episode more than once. And trust me, I never watch episodes more than once. So, it's just straight up. There's a reason this show is rated so highly as it is. I mean, I think it's like 9.5 stars on IMDb. Straight up. 9.5 stars. That almost never happens. And they've managed to keep up that quality all the way up to almost the last couple of shows of the show. So, if you're trying to figure out some really cool writing stuff, hey, this is definitely something you need to look into. And if you think the show's good, yeah, you ought to see the books, you know. I definitely wouldn't recommend it if you try to avoid subject matter. George R.R. Martin does not hold back in that department. But, straight up, there's a ton of really great little details, a lot of really great character arcs, and some incredibly awesome stuff that just keeps popping up throughout the entire show that actually makes it worth to rewatch. So, when I start going after certain aspects of the show, well, this is a podcast about writing, and, well, occasionally, part of what I like doing is just simply unloading on stuff. You know, there's some stuff that just didn't make sense to me, stuff that still doesn't make sense to me even after a lot of conversations, and I do mean lots. So I'm going to be getting a lot of that stuff off my chest. Yeah, expect this to be more or less a therapy session. But, you know, you should be used to that by now. At least I would hope you'd be used to that by now. So, the obvious caveat here is, yes, I love the show. But there were some interesting problems over the last couple of shows. So, yeah, I expect that to be... Let's just have some fun with it, okay? First off, on the part of the good stuff, I definitely have to commend Night of the Seven Kingdoms. It's arguably one of the best bottle shows I've ever seen in my life. A bottle show, in case you're curious, is when they have very limited sets, and it's usually the dreaded clip show. Here they basically are going through a lot of remembrances, getting drunk, having a little bit of fun, and it's overall just an incredible little show, and they just simply have fun playing around with the characters. One of the cool things, of course, that happens is Lady Bran is knighted and becomes a Knight of the Seven Kingdoms. In fact, she's the first female knight. You know, there's a lot of interesting conversations. Tormund and his milk is arguably one of the things that stands out in a lot of people's minds for probably all the wrong reasons. But it's Tormund. You know, you get a chance to see some of the characters just simply wax and poetically and have fun with it. It's just straight up. If you were looking for a really great little character building show, The Night of the Seven Kingdoms is a great place to start. There were also a lot of really great images throughout the show. My personal favorite had to be when they had Drogon way behind in the background as Dany came up to address her armies, you know, at the last show. You know, before she gives her the "we're going to go out and liberate everybody" thing. And if you pay attention, you'll see Drogon's wings spread behind her, giving her the appearance that the wings were actually hers. You know, just there's a lot of really great shots like that. There's also some stuff, if you pay attention, that showed up in a lot of other shows that was, in movies, that was obviously from there. Return of the King, for example, had, you know, everybody had them go up to the big high thing and see the armies, which is a shot they paralleled here. One shot they shouldn't have paralleled is where they have Bilbo Baggins give his book and, you know, Frodo finishes it. Yeah, they should not have done such an obvious thing. It's just, when they actually brought the book out and you saw what the name of the book was, yeah, that was just one of those shots that shouldn't have happened. But in the last couple of shows, you had a lot of weirdness like that happen. You had a lot of other cool stuff, like the dragon names, for example. Don't worry, we're going to put some serious pins in that one. Another cool scene was, of course, Drogon basically melting the throne. I mean, seriously, we all wanted to see that happen. We wanted to see that thing destroyed at one point or another. And so it was sort of really nice to see it go bye-bye. I mean, it was just, that was scene that pretty much the entire series was leading up to, and to see it go just melt down into molten steel. Seriously, that was just arguably one of the coolest scenes in the entire show, and there was a lot of really cool scenes throughout the entire show. So, yeah, it's just there's a lot of really nice stuff going on. There was stuff like Sir Jonah's last moments, which was exactly what he wanted. He wanted to, when he died, he wanted to basically do it, defending his queen, and he wanted to have the tears over him, which is exactly what he got. That's one of the few times we've seen Dany actually break down and cry throughout the entire series. It was just overall a really beautiful scene. You know, you obviously had Tyrion, who was incredible throughout it. I mean, straight up. Peter Dinklage could read a freaking telephone book, and I'd sit there enthralled. Of course, he'd also probably do it in a satirical tone and sort of condescending, but it'd be sort of fun to watch nonetheless, you know? And we've had the Clegane Bull, which, you know, had the Mountain and the Hound go after each other. You know, something we all wanted to see happen at one point or another, and it was just nice to see that actually get finally delivered upon. So, you know, there were some incredibly awesome moments. I mean, you know, going back to the dragon names for a sec, you had some really neat stuff going on there. I mean, straight up. You had the three dragons were all each named after various important men, or males more accurately, in Daenerys' life. You had Drogon, who was obviously her husband, that she was married off to, or more accurately, sold to. You had Viserion, who was named after the person who sold her off into Drogo. And, of course, you also had Rhaegal, who was named after her stillborn son. So, it was just sort of really nice to see that there's also a little bit of foreshadowing with those names, because, you know, Viserion was the one that ended up getting killed and becoming, for lacking a better phrase, the Ice Dragon. You know, he became an undead dragon under the Winter King's thrall, and actually ended up thus betraying Dany, just like his namesake did. You had Rhaegal, who was the, you know, who ended up dying early. Again, just like her son did. And of course, Drogon was there to whenever she basically took over the kingdoms. You know, just like he threatened, the actual Drogo had threatened to do pretty much on his first appearance. And of course, Dany copied his speeches a couple of times throughout. But the key here is that you had Rhaegal, who died early, just like her son. You had Viserion, who ended up betraying her, just like his namesake. And you had Drogon, who helped her take over the world, just like he had actually his namesake had threatened to do. You know, some really cool little foreshadowing in there. And don't worry, we'll get back to those dragons. So we're going to put another pin in those, but we'll collect on that one. One of the other interesting things was the mention that the dragons would have 3 heads, which meant, of course, that they'd have 3 riders, which, of course, ended up being Dany, Jon, and while everybody thought it was going to be Tyrion, it ended up actually being the Night King himself. You know, which is sort of a neat little twist. Of course, there was all sorts of neat little twists throughout the entire show. But that was just sort of one of the cooler ones. You know, we thought it was going to be Tyrion and it ended up being the Night King. And who could have figured that one out, in all honesty? There was some really nice stuff going on throughout the series. Unfortunately, then things got apparently just a wee bit rushed. And it became just way too obvious. One of the things that became a minor point, or actually became a major point, and then seemed to get discarded somewhere, was, I know I'm going to get the pronunciations wrong, and I'm going to throw in it as a caveat, I'm going to get a lot of pronunciations wrong. You know, there was the thing with the Azor Ahai. It's just straight up, that was built up to be sort of a major mystery, at least in terms of the fandom, but it was never really delivered upon. I mean, there's still people who are arguing about exactly who was the prince who was promised. In fact, there's even been an argument that the prince wasn't necessarily a prince, but could have been a princess. You know? We've seen everybody from Jon, Jaime, Arya, you know, even Daenerys even ended up having a hat in that particular ring. It just would have been nice to have that mystery resolved at some point. It just seems like there was a lot of major threads that should have gotten resolved, but really didn't. You know? Another problem was obviously that Cersei the person who never gave up and always defined things on her terms ended up running from the final battle. You know? Straight up. You know, this is somebody who throughout the entire series established a reputation that Cersei never runs and she always defines whatever goes on. You know? When it was her time to do the shaming thing, she could have stayed in the Red Keep and never had to worry about it. She instead decided to go out and actually do the shame thing, or the shame walk, and then burned down the church afterward just to make a point. You know, that of course spurred a lot of really bad King's Landing jokes. But, you know, straight up, there's a lot of time. I mean, even there at the end, her final thing was to kill off somebody she knew was important. If she's told was, don't do this. And she ended up killing off one of Dany's friends and Grey Worm's lover. And it was just out of total spite. You know? This is arguably the thing that ended up setting Dany off. If she didn't already have intentions of doing so. And we're going to put another pin. But it just didn't feel right to see Cersei actually end up basically running there at the end. And the only reason she ended up dying is because, well, Jaime found her. You know? It's just, and when you actually look at the scene, she could have been 10 feet away in virtually any direction, and she would have escaped. It just felt wrong that Cersei was running. Of course, as a side note, that did sort of, you remember the Valonqar prophecy that a lot of fans were talking about that didn't actually make it into the show, but was a major proponent apparently of the book? Well, it could actually be argued that Jaime fulfilled it. Maggie the Frog just had hand placement off. Basically, for those who don't know, there was a prophecy that apparently Cersei was supposed to die at the hands of her little brother, and a lot of people thought, including Cersei, actually thought it was apparently going to be Tyrion because, well, size-wise. However, it could actually be argued that Jaime ended up fulfilling that potential prophecy by actually being, because Jaime is her younger brother, which of course a lot of people refer to as the little brother. And of course he was sort of embracing her there at the end, which would basically mean that Maggie the Frog could have actually been right on the money, just a little bit off on the placement. You know what I mean? And let's go ahead and talk about Bran for a moment, because there's a really cool fan theory that basically had him knowing, in fact setting up himself as the king of the Six Kingdoms. Specifically, a little bit interesting thing about Bran is that he not only can basically send, astral project or whatever, he can actually watch things anywhere in Westeros, and at the same time he can also influence events there. The best example of this is how, he was able to send a psychic message back to Hodor, who of course we find out became Hodor because of Hold the Door. However, there was so much raw psychic power thrown at Hodor that, well, he was made into a simpleton. Which, of course, turned out to be an advantage later on. But the key here is, not only can Bran send his sight back in any particular period of time anywhere on Westeros, but he's also able to have limited psychic control as well as influence the actions of those in that particular area. So it would make perfect sense that he would basically be able to set himself up as king, basically winning the Game of Thrones. Which is sort of an interesting game theory in of itself. I mean, basically he had a really cool trick and he found a way to take advantage of it. Admittedly, it'd be interesting to see some of the details of that, but the bottom line is, Bran's a lot scarier than people give him credit for. And when you realize that he's able to communicate from his future self on back, that gives him a lot of tactical advantages. At Winterfell, for example, everybody knows how calm he was throughout the entire thing, even though he had the Night King gunning for him. Well, obviously Bran knew that he was going to survive, so there's no reason to be worried. His future self had said, dude, you're about to do something, here's how you need to deal with it, here's where you need to be, make sure you're there, and you're going to survive no problem. Well, came down to it, he was right where he needed to be. Arya showed up, ended up killing off the Night King, and he was perfectly fine. At no point did the Night King come within even a couple of paces of Bran. Of course, then we get a really silly moment where we find out the Night King is a dreaded load-bearing wizard, and once you destroy him, you get rid of everything he turned. But, the bottom line here is that there is actual canon examples of Bran, if you look at it in sort of a squinty-eyed sort of way, of him communicating with his various selves. And once you can do that, and then it's just a matter of figuring out who you need to basically manipulate in such a way that eventually they'll come out and, you just need to basically make sure these people are in the right places, these people die, and all of a sudden you're basically in a major position to become king of the 6 kingdoms. Would have been 7, but Sansa decided she wanted to Winterfell. Which is sort of a really weird theory, but a really accurate one, especially given right there at the end when Bran points out he knows why he's there, and that's to accept being king of the 6 kingdoms. That can't be total coincidence. And I hate coincidences in stories anyway. The Battle of Winterfell is another interesting area if you actually stop and look at it. I mean, it's just straight up. You had way too many deaths. The most interesting one I thought was Lyanna Mormont, the little girl, lady, Lyanna, who basically should not have been there by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, seriously. She should have been inside the keep with the other people, not out on the freaking battlefield. Seriously. There's just a lot of deaths that were just way too... It just seems like every once in a while Game of Thrones would realize, hey, we got all these way too many characters, so let's get rid of a lot of them, finish up their arcs, and all of a sudden, let's kill off a lot of them, just because it would be sort of fun to watch. And she happened to be one of those deaths, which makes absolutely no sense to me. I mean, it was just... I appreciate that there's a lot of random deaths, and don't get me wrong, I'm not expecting there to be any happy endings. It's George R. R. Martin. He's not known for doing happy endings. In fact, he's known for pretty much just the opposite. But, so obviously that's not a problem. I'm not expecting everybody to have a really cool, cheerful, birds in the background type of ending. I don't read Martin stuff for the happy endings. I read it for the solid storytelling. I don't care if the ending is happy. I don't care if it's sad, as long as it's a relatively good ending. Good being is that it was actually thought out meticulously and it actually works. It's just, a lot of the deaths at Winterfell just felt that it was just simply this character's story arc is over, we have no more plans for this character, so hey, let's do a convenient character death. And some of the characters that simply didn't really have major story arcs ended up dying all over the place. After a while, it's just, this is one of those weird, I don't mind seeing a lot of character deaths, just make sure the character mattered. And you had a really scary little girl who shouldn't have been where she was and got killed for it. Yeah, I appreciate that, that lady Lyanna is definitely aggressive little girl, and she is probably the scariest female character in the entire show. And that's allowing for, Best Assassin Arya, Dragon Rider Dany, and Mean Drunk Cersei. But it just felt a waste. There's a lot of deaths in that particular battle that felt a waste. The deaths that you could actually see. Yeah, I get the cinematographer was trying to do something fun with the lighting. Yeah, it didn't work out too well. But the key here is, at Winterfell, there was just a lot of stuff that just didn't make sense later on. The biggest of these, of course, is Viserion, who, straight up, you've got Jon playing tag with a dragon, is what it basically boils down to. At some point in time, Dany and Jon should have taken him out. There's absolutely no question of that. He should have been, you've got 2 dragons, you've got 1. Those other 2 dragons should have wiped the floor with that 3rd dragon. I don't care how powerful he is. It's just that's way too big of an asset on the battlefield, that if he was actually being used the way it was supposed to be, rather than playing tag with Jon freaking Snow, that dragon could have turned the tide around big time. Heck, Night King could have sent the dragon after Bran and eliminated a lot of issues right there. It's just straight up. There's a lot, goes in that category of really cool stuff, but it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to happen, Just like when they're fighting dragons with the scorpions later on. Those big ballista things. Yeah, straight up. If this thing is going to be going up against dragons, it's supposed to be the end-all, be-all weapon against dragons, and you easily can't elevate it? Seriously? You're going up against a monster that tends to think in three-dimensional space, and you're limiting yourself right off the bat to a plain view. There's a reason I think Oren deserved to have his fleet taken away from him, and taken away from him violently, just like it was. You need to develop a weapon that can actually work in 3 dimensions relatively quickly. Not how the scorpions were working out. It's just doesn't make sense. And again, there's sort of the irony in this situation. A lot of this stuff doesn't make sense because, well, you've got all these really cool details throughout the entire story that are so meticulous, so well thought out, so incredibly well planned for, and then you have an entire string of stuff that just doesn't make sense. You've got a major dragon on the battlefield of a major battle, and he's playing tag with one fighter. Or you've got this end-all be-all weapon and against dragons, and it can't hit the 3rd dimension. We saw how that worked out. But again, like I said, a lot of these are relatively minor quibbles. Overall, the series actually worked out pretty well. Until, of course, you had the last 2 shows. Alright, so let me have fun with one particular section just to really have some serious fun here. Here's the deal. I don't think Dany went insane there at the end. I mean, it's just straight up. She didn't. I figure she basically was planning all this from the very beginning. You got 3 strikes against the whole Dany is the Mad Queen thing. First off, actually, let's go 4 things just to have a little bit more fun with this. Alright. First off, foreshadowing is not the same as character building. That is, you can have a lot of people, you can build a lot of stuff that you might want the character to go off and do, but just because you've got a lot of people saying stuff about that character, that doesn't count as actually building up the character. It just points out that character has a lot of stakes and could actually has something to really fight for. And straight up, Dany had the whole Mad Queen thing that she had to fight against. And it was never something that you could actually see. I mean, yeah, she killed a lot of people, but the people she killed were actually legitimate kills, She's trying to basically get all the Unsullied to her side. The easiest way to do that, kill off the Masters. And let's get real, the Masters were slavers, so that was not a major issue. The Khaleesi, back at the original camp with Drogo. Yeah, you had this woman go and do a revenge plot that ended up having Drogo, turn into basically a vegetable. And the way it was accomplished was by the witch basically casting a spell on Dany's child and fueling it to heal Drogo, but just enough to keep him alive. So yeah, you attack a woman's child, you deserve to die, and the more painful the better. Straight up, right there until the very end, every death that Dany did was totally legit in my book. I get what Tyrion was saying that, yeah, we support her because, well, we thought that they were bad guys. Clue you in on something. They were bad guys. It's just, I can't really think of anybody that didn't deserve to die that Dany killed. It's just, I'm not seeing her as the completely innocent victim in all this. Or relatively being a victim, which is sort of weird when you think about it that way. So yeah, you had a lot of people telling her that she'd be the Mad Queen. That you had a lot of people acting as if she was going to become mad at some point. But it doesn't necessarily mean that she herself was actually mad. It just means you had a lot of people creating a fear, working on that fear, and in and of itself was a really great little detail. I mean, straight up. You don't really see a whole lot of fantasy books where you have people basically creating a rumor campaign, acting on those rumors, and then hit the point where they actually are losing their lives based on those rumors. Rest in peace, Varys. It's just, that was a really great little detail. And the reason I'm saying she didn't go insane, you're going to love this. Let's go with the theory that her entire intent behind her saying that she was going to break the will was that she actually wasn't going to. And let's get real. She didn't. At the very end there, the so-called Mad Queen Dany is actually hitting a point where she is actually reinforcing the will, hardcore. She's established herself as a despot, just like, the original Mad King before her. Her actual father was not exactly a happy camper. And yeah, there were a lot of parallels between the way what he did and what Dany did. But let's say for the sake of argument that rather than wanting to actually break the will like she kept saying, she actually wanted to use that just as a campaign slogan, get everybody behind her, and then managed to get them into a situation where it looked like she was going to break the will and then changed her mind. But by that time, everybody had so much investment in what she was doing that they just kept on following along with it. Sound about right? Because that's exactly what happened. Dany kept saying she was going to break the will, but if she was really going to break the will, and don't get me wrong, there were occasional signs of it. For example, totally eliminating the slavers. That was a major step in that direction. But I think she did it just to get the Unsullied on her side. Just like she already had all the Dothraki were already backing her. So at that point, she's got one army. She sees a chance to get another one. She tells those people exactly what they want to hear and then proceeds to do it because, let's get real, they're slavers. Who's going to miss them anyway? She gets rid of them. And then she takes all these people, gets them over to Westeros proper, takes care of the Night King problem, which, let's get real, that should have been built up just a little bit more. I mean, realistically, the Night King only went into combat once as far as the actual major army went. And he didn't last past that. This is like the big bad to this point, and he basically falls in his first fight? Seriously? But the good news is that from a story perspective, is that the Battle of Winterfell, managed to get rid of a lot of her forces. I mean, there were the front ones on the front line. They actually ended up dying horribly, and she was actually, cut back on her forces big time. She then decides to go after King's Landing, because now she's the heroine of the Battle of Winterfell, and so she's got a lot of people backing her. So, the deaths that she saw suffered there, well worth it. You're playing chess, getting rid of a few pawns, and set you up to kill off the queen. Hey, you're good to go, right? So, she takes all these people, sends them over to King's Landing. Unfortunately, instead of having a big bad fight like she wanted, they give up. Ignoring the fact, like I pointed out earlier, this just doesn't make sense giving Cersei. I mean, Cersei, every time she's up against an obstacle, she tears the thing down, or she blows it up, or she figures out some way to plow bloody right through it, And all of a sudden, she's got a army on her doorstep, and she's running? Alright. Just go with it. It makes no sense to me, but let's go with it. So Dany's all of a sudden in a situation where, she needs a King's Landing to go bye-bye. Period. What does she do? She basically goes into it. You notice that before the battle, she steeled herself. That is, there was, depending on how you want to look at it, you either had a situation where she was letting the insanity take over, she struggled against it, lost about it, and just went totally insane, or she decided, realized that, hey, I need to basically destroy King's Landing in order to make a point here. I've got all these people, they're trying for battle. If I just simply don't have a battle, all these people are going to go to the Four Winds. What does she do? she creates a battle. She's got everybody basically surrendering, but she decides to say, screw it. We want to see everybody here die. We want to see them punished for what they've been doing. And so the Unsullied and the Dothraki go in, kill off all the people, which of course ends up setting a conflict up between her and Jon. However, I will point out something of note, is that if you realize that you're trying to basically eliminate the opposing queen, well, why is it that she didn't really go after the Red Keep all that much? I mean, straight up, if she was trying to basically eliminate Cersei, why not make sure that the body's dead? And she I mean, straight up, she had these sources available, but at no point does she even really care about making sure that the body's dead. You know, Tyrion goes out and makes sure about that. You know? Not saying, of course, there aren't some little cues that say that Daenerys couldn't be setting herself up to be the Mad Queen. After all, she does basically go through a lot of advisors. But at the same time, if I'm trying to be, you know, have everybody a little bit of fear of me, hey, wouldn't I take advantage of the fact that they're going to be worrying about me being the so-called Mad Queen and sort of work out to take advantage of their reputation just a little bit? This, of course, ends up making Dany a lot more of a shrewd player than she actually comes off as being, and she's already coming off as a savvy player. I mean, there's just a lot of stuff that she does that a regular young woman wouldn't think to do, and she does it on a regular basis. Of course, she does screw up with her strategy and makes her one trump card basically be her own attack, and that's it. Every time she goes out into a battle, she uses a dragon. Eventually, you know, those dragons are going to fall. But let's get real. She tends to use armies in big, bold, you know, showy demonstrations of power that just simply don't make sense from a straight tactical perspective. Going after King's Landing in terms of killing everybody off, you know, looks pretty good until you realize that at that point in time, everybody was starting to split off from her that weren't, and the only two groups that she had, the Dothraki and the Unsullied, well, there's no way to basically rejuvenate those resources. Whereas everybody else around her, you know, if they needed more army, hey, they just start drafting peasants, you know. In essence, what you have is you have two huge but, you know, limited armies that are all of a sudden having to go up against these ridiculously huge armies. That's if Dany had actually survived. Obviously, Jon killing her off was exactly what needed to happen. So, you know, it's just straight up. When it comes down to the whole Dany went insane thing, you should be hearing a lot of air quotes, because I don't think she did. I think she did exactly what she intended to do from the start to finish. And you really want a fun kicker? Let's go back to those names of the dragons again, because you're going to love this. In terms of what... Now keep in mind, she named them each after various males in her life that meant something important to her for various reasons. So, and of course she learned something from each one of those encounters, which means that she was using the dragons as big, huge mnemonic aids to remind her of the lessons she had learned. From Viserion, or namesake thereof, she learned to basically do whatever it takes. You screw whoever you can. If they happen to be betrayed, so be it. This is exactly what you need to do to win. From Drogo, aka the namesake of Drogon, she learned to basically be ruthless, to overwhelm the opponent, and to basically keep charging in no matter what. Gee, what was her tactic most of the time? Was to just charge in and overwhelm the opponent using her dragon? And of course, from Rhaegal, even though she actually technically learned this from the Khaleesi back in wherever, you know, she learned that basically you need to be extremely ruthless and to use the enemy's tools against them. In essence, she named her 3 dragons names that she would remember, stuff that she'd been taught by those 3 people, and then used it in all of her battles. In essence, you see the names of the dragons and you start realizing that these are the same tactics she would use later on in pretty much every battle, and all of a sudden it starts looking like everything seems to be more of an intent than, you know, some sort of, well, she decided to go totally insane on the last possible moment. You know, it's just sort of silly when you think about it. Now, this of course brings up the really fun question of how I think the Game of Thrones should have actually ended up, ending up. All right, I think there would have been three major changes. First off, I think that when she basically came into King's Landing and she would have gone after Cersei. The only problem is that Cersei would have been ready and waiting for her and had a couple of scorpions loaded and waiting for her. Dany gets within range. She fires off a couple of those scorpions. Drogon manages to dodge them. However, while she's doing this, in comes Jaime. And yeah, you gotta appreciate Jaime's got a major Kingslayer thing going on. He did try to, he not only killed the king, but he almost took out Bran, who actually became the king. Interesting that. But in comes Jaime. He and Cersei, have a quick reunion, and then all of a sudden Jaime decides to go all in. And by all in, I mean all 4 feet of his sword goes into her breastbone, killing Cersei right then and there. There's a quick and he holds her. However, Dany takes advantage of this and turns both of them into cinders. However, she's still basically a little bit of a lunatic. This, of course, means that the big scene between her and Jon in the throne room still is going to happen. Jon is still going to kill her for exactly the same reasons, except that instead of being... Now, see, here's another problem I had with the original story, and it's just a real quick aside, is that you've got Grey Worm who wants to kill off Jon, but Grey Worm has total control over Jon, but he never kills him, and instead waits whatever number of weeks for everybody to assemble into a court. That's, something seriously wrong there. Anyway, so the court gets convened. Jon is, of course, acquitted because, well, one, they've got a legal precedent in terms of kings going insane and people coming in and taking care of them. So, Dany is declared to be a threat to the realm, and therefore Jon's actions are totally legit. However, Grey Worm, of course, takes exception to this, and he and Jon have a little bit of a throwdown. Grey Worm ends up killing Jon. 8 seasons of whining. I've had it. Jon dies. However, at that point, Grey Worm ends up taking Jon's place and heads north. Makes perfect sense. There's a lot of really cool stuff going on. Up north, there's a lot of land. Great place to get total, Obviously, he'll go off to North, play around for a little bit, leave some of his Unsullied there to take care of potential slavers, but he's eventually going to be heading north. Meanwhile, back at the court, I think Gendry would actually end up being crowned king because, well, Dany did do a little bit of a boo-boo. And that's she legitimized Gendry. And once you legitimize Gendry, that means that he became the bigger threat. I mean, Jon was never really a threat in the first place. The only people that could actually prove who Jon was in terms of heredity was, well, Bran. There was a passage that alluded to a potential affair, but there was no actual clear parentage as far as Jon was considered, as far as the paperwork goes. The only person who knew was the person who could actually go back in time, check things out, and it happened to be his brother. Yeah, I don't think it'd be held up in court. So anyway, however, Dany did legitimize Gendry, and when she legitimized Gendry, well, Gendry has one heck of a story himself. That, of course, would entitle him to become king of the 6 kingdoms. I mean, it probably sounds I would still keep Winterfell separate. But that's basically what I think. I think Jaime would end up killing Cersei. Dany would end up killing both of them. Jon would still kill off Dany. Grey Worm would end up killing Jon and take his place going north. But other than that, it pretty much work out the same. And like you said, it's overall a really incredible series. Don't get me wrong. It just had some interesting problems it needed to work out. It just felt really too rushed. Definitely go watch the series. It's earned its reputation in all sorts of ways. It's just like you said, this is me venting. So, apologize if we've got a little more annoying. But, That said, have a good evening. I'll talk to you later.